Welcome to the Steve Stine Guitar Podcast, brought to you by guitar-Zoom.com. If you want to improve your guitar playing, keep listening. If you want to improve even faster, go to guitar-Zoom.com, where you'll find all of Steve's premium courses, masterclasses, and memberships that'll help you quickly and easily improve your playing. Now here's your host, Steve Stine.
Hey, Steve Stine here, and I am happy to be here with my buddy, Brian Hollenbeck. Now, Brian, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Good. Brian and I have known each other for quite some time, but there's a lot of things that I don't know about you. So I'm excited to find out some of these things. This is cool. So tell me first off, for everybody that's listening, what's a typical day look like for you?
Well, there's two kinds of days. There's a day where I'm at home, and then there's a day that I'm on the road. About 150 days a year. That's almost half of the year. So at home is pretty standard. Get up, run 6 or 7 miles, either on the treadmill like I have to right now because it's freezing outside and snowing and icy and all that, or I'll go out and run, and then I'll come in and I'll do some design work, practice anything I have to get worked up that I'm either working on to record or to play in the band, and then spend the evening with my lovely wife. If I'm on the road, a typical day starts up. I wake up in my bunk as we are probably still driving to wherever we're going. Then we'll park. We'll go use the shower room. I'll do some stuff on my laptop throughout the day. I'll go in for sound check, usually 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Dinner about 5 o'clock. Then I might lay down for a little bit or rest before showtime. And then a 2-hour show with Hairball. And then come off the stage, get cleaned up, have a little food, hop in my bunk, generally about the time that we're leaving town to go drive to the next town, and then wake up, rinse and repeat.
So for those of you that don't know, tell them a little bit about what Hairball is.
I generally like to describe Hairball as Las Vegas Review, an arena rock band had a baby. That would be Hairball.
Right.
So we are a tribute show, if you will, but it's a little bit more than anything you'll ever see in a club. We have 3 guys who sing. They have as elaborate of costumes, makeup, wigs, everything, just like you would have in a Vegas show. And they come out as character that we play each little set of songs. You know, our sweet spot is kind of the 2,000 to 5,000 seat venues. I've been in the band about 3 years, and I think we've played about 40 states. So we go all over. We are on the road 12 months a year. We have no downtime, and we do about 120 to 130 shows a year.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, if you're from the Midwest, you know who Hairball is. Maybe there's some people out there that don't know, but if you get a chance to check them out, I definitely would. It's a great show, great music, and you're right. Hairball has been around for many, many years, and they've got the show down to a science. And so it's very tight and looks great, and the lights are great. The show itself is great. The music is great. So if you get a chance, definitely check out Hairball. Do you guys have a website?
Yep. www.hairballonline.com, and then it's every social media platform that there is. So, yep, absolutely. And
very cool.
There's videos and photos of everything, and you can get an idea of what it is. And the big plus about Hairball is if you happen for some reason to not like Kiss, which again, I understand that.
I don't understand that.
We have to ask you several questions about that. But just in case, say, for example, somebody in the world didn't like Kiss. Well, don't worry, because in about 5 or 6 minutes, it's going to be Van Halen, and then AC/DC, and then Queen, and then Guns N' Roses, and then Twisted Sister, and then Def Leppard or Journey or Ozzy. The list just goes on. It's a 2-hour highlight reel, mostly 80s. There's some 70s with stuff like Alice Cooper and Queen, but just 2 hours of arena rock highlights. And
right.
So if for some reason you don't like that song or happen to not really love that artist, don't worry. It's going to change here pretty quick. And then it'll be something else. And then it'll be something else after that. And then it'll be something else after that. And it's just a relentless assault.
Well, it's interesting. You're right. A couple things about that. There's a lot of listeners that are in bands, in cover bands. And usually in a cover band, you play a song by an artist and then you'll play a song by another artist, or you'll play a country song and then you'll play a rock song or whatever it might be. And so your whole set is just, maybe you'll do 2 songs by an artist, but they're spread apart. That's usually the way a cover band works. I totally give Hairball credit for this Not that I would know, because I don't know what other kinds of tribute bands are out there, but certainly Hairball being around as long as they have, they were the first ones that I really recognized to do clumps of songs by bands. So you'd have 3 or 4 or 5 songs by an artist like you're talking about, which I always thought was really interesting. And then having a frontman that looks like the frontman of the band. So instead of being like a tribute band where you go out and see, let's say, a Judas Priest tribute band. So everybody in the band looks like the guys from Judas Priest, whatever it might be. This is different where you guys are you guys, but you have the frontman who comes out and looks like the person and sings like the person, and then you do classic songs.
Sometimes, especially if we do something new, I'll just, because I'm on stage the whole show.
Right.
And so it's always interesting to watch the mannerisms, and every once in a while I'll just like stop and go, oh my God, that's what David Lee Roth does. All of the mannerisms, and then the look and the voice and everything else. It's
right. So you think about the singers, it's not like they're slouching. They'll do their set, and then they got to go back, and then somebody else is already ready to go. So they come out, and now that person is getting ready for whatever it is they have coming up. They're already changing and getting ready for that. I think it's a lot of fun. And like you said, as opposed to maybe some other bands that do something somewhat like Hairball does, certainly not in the same way, and certainly not with the same massive stage presence that Hairball has. What I love about it is exactly what you just said. It's not 10 songs or 8 songs by an artist. So I'm not a huge Bon Jovi fan. So to sit and listen to 45 minutes or 30 minutes of Bon Jovi is a little bit much for me. So the great thing is 3 songs, 4 songs, and it's just coming out. And the other thing is that makes it nice is even if you're not a big whatever fan, like you said, it's still really cool because the show is big. So it's a great thing. And that's what I love about it is it shifts gears so quickly that when you're just getting into whatever, because like for you and me, we're big Kiss fans. So those are my favorite parts. And they're not long enough, but I get it because you just got to keep shifting it out and doing something else for somebody else. So definitely, if you haven't seen Hairball, you need to check them out.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. When you're on the road, do you still have a regular job while you're on the road? Or when you're on the road, do you not have to work or anything like that?
I'm one of the guys who does something remotely. I will work remotely in the daytime because I'm a glutton that way. And it keeps me engaged and I'm not just laying around. I do go hard and I go all the time. And so it does keep me interested in going. And again, with the technology that we have, I'm able to do it. So I looked at it like, well, if I can go and it doesn't matter where I'm at, I can log in and get online and do my work and I can send things off and I can do remote calls and I can do all of that stuff. It's funny because I was doing that before all of this lockdown stuff happened and all of the COVID stuff. And then after that all happened, the last 2 years now all of a sudden, these last 23 months, the whole rest of the world started doing pretty much what I did all the time anyway.
Yeah, right.
It seemed out of the ordinary and a little bit odd and a little like, well, as long as you're doing that, okay, we're good. And now that's just so normal. Like, well, yeah, everybody logs in and you're on Teams or you're on Zoom or you're on whatever video conferencing platform you're on. And you log in remotely and you send everything in and we all use Dropbox or WeTransfer or whatever it is. And that's just what you do, right? So my unorthodox and out of the ordinary work arrangement that way now has become just how we do things. I do enjoy designing. I enjoy just creative process. If I didn't have to give that up and I could go out on the road full time and do the Hairball thing, it was like, well, why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah. And for those of you that I'm sure you've seen a number of the remote collaborations that I wind up coming with, of course, Brian is the bass player that plays on 99% of everything that I wind up doing. Whether it's an in-person thing with a band or whether it's a remote collaboration or whatever it is, you wind up with these few people that you always go to for everything because they're going to get the job done and they're going to do a really good job. And it makes your job easier when you're the person that's starting whatever this project is, whatever this thing's going to be. And so, I work with the same people over and over and over. Number one, they're good friends of mine. But number two, because I know I can rely on them. That's why you'll see Brian in these videos all the time, is just because when we decide to do something, I don't think Brian has said no to a single video or a single song that I've ever said, do you want to do this? And whether he does or doesn't, he'll just go, yeah, I'll do it. So That's what we've been doing. During COVID, that's where that started. Was my life didn't change either. I mean, I'm a remote guy doing everything that I do, but I just felt like all these bands, nobody was playing. And I was like, wow, this would be kind of fun. So I think one of the first ones that I did was with you. It was like Love Removal Machine or something like that we did. It was an early cult thing that we did. Do you remember that?
I sang into my phone.
Yeah, that's right.
Just straight off the phone, like it was very, very low tech.
Right.
It was Love Removal Machine.
Okay, perfect. Because there was just such a shift in what was happening. At that time, I was studying more audio production because I do the normal audio production, but I was really studying. And so I think back on those early videos that we did versus where they are now. And there's been such a difference in the quality of what we've been able to put out, which has been a really fun learning experience.
Absolutely. It's been great to get to do stuff again because when I got the hairball gig is so time consuming, and which is awesome that to get to do some other stuff like we have over the last 2 years, because we've been back on the road since last May. I'm still home a few days and it's like, oh, I got to go in and cut these tracks for Steve.
Right.
And we've still been able to maintain it. Has been fantastic. I don't know if that would have ever occurred had we not had all the other stuff happen.
It's a blessing. When you know people in the industry, the amount of content that you can create never ends. But right now we're kind of in a process where we're trying to figure out how to maybe minimize that because we've got some other ideas of some things that we'd like to do too. But it's hard because it's like you'll be driving and all of a sudden you hear a song on the radio and go, oh, that would be awesome.
That would be great.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden that's what you're doing. But anyway, so let's go back a little bit for you. I always love to talk about like your first experiences with music, not playing an instrument yet, but just when you were a little kid. Can you remember an experience that you had that you went, wow, this music thing, this song or this band or this something is freaking, and it changes your world?
My uncle gave my brother and I a copy of Kiss Alive 2. That was absolutely life-changing. That would have been, I think, 77. So I was like 5.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I went from listening to my copy of The Count Counts from Sesame Street record to King of the Nighttime World. And we were putting on Kiss air guitar concerts in our bedroom and constantly getting, turn that down, jumping off the bed. They wore the stage risers. So that was the first, all of a sudden, now I know what rock and roll is. And here are these guys and this record. And for those of you who might not know, and again, I don't know why you would know this, of course, but when you open up Kiss Alive 2, it hits a gatefold and it opens up. And inside is a huge picture of the Kiss Alive 2 stage. And the risers are up on each side. And the drum risers all the way up, and the cats are on the thing, and the smoke's going off, and they're on the stairs. I mean, as a little kid, that just blew my mind, and I was like, I want to do that. And they were like superheroes. I mean, they were like these creatures from another planet. I didn't know what Please Meet You in the Ladies' Room really meant, but I can only imagine what my mother thought as I'm 5 years old singing Love Gun, but it was all good in my world.
You know, it's funny because I have the same experience. I mean, there were a couple songs, I had little 45s of songs that I was really into. And because we had minimal amounts of records and things, I would listen to the same song 500 times. But I went to a cousin's house and he had Love Gun, and it was the same thing. I mean, in our age group, it's hard to explain a few things. Number one, it's hard to explain the power of the album because it was so big. And like you could just study it.
Like it was more than just the thing that held the record. And you studied every inch of it.
That's right.
And if it was a gatefold, that opened up and double the sides of stuff to look at.
Yep. And then sometimes you'd pull the record out and then like there'd be stuff, maybe lyrics or whatever written on the sleeve. And then they started, Alice Cooper and Kiss and different people started experimenting with putting things in there, little surprises, whether it be stickers or Alive 2 had the booklet, which was just absolutely astonishing. The solo albums had the posters. So as a kid, you're already playing with toys. I had my Star Wars toys and G.I. Joe stuff and all that. And then you had your superhero stuff, and you're right. Now all of a sudden this band comes along that's like this amalgamation of all of these things. But they actually can play music, and they're like super cool, and they're superhuman, and they're superhero. It's hard to explain to somebody who doesn't get Kiss. I had a buddy, I used to go over to his house all the time. He lived across the street, and his brother was older than us. So he was more into Rush and things like that. And he had a couple Kiss albums, but he thought of Kiss as being cheesy. But it was our age group, man. And so the combination of having those records and looking at those and studying those, and then this Kiss thing, it's funny how so many of us, that was like, I'm not going to be a doctor or a lawyer. I just want to grow up and be a rock star. That's what you wanted to do because of that. So now you've gotten your experience with Kiss. So where do you go from here?
That was one. And then the next biggest one, it's weird because it still happens today. And every once in a while, I'll see it posted on Facebook, online, or I'll see it pop up if I'm on YouTube looking up stuff or whatever. But I was in grade school by this point, probably middle to later grade school. And my brother was having a couple buddies sleep over and they rented The Song Remains the Same. And for whatever reason, The Song Remains the Same was rated R. And I remember asking if I could hang out with them and watch it. And of course, they were like, no. And I remember my dad saying, and that's rated R, so you don't watch that.
Right.
You're too young. Which, of course, just made me want to watch it that much more.
Sure.
So I think like the next morning after their sleepover and hangout or whatever, they were all having breakfast upstairs. And I went downstairs and I watched it. And I'll never forget. It was all cool and amazing. And I was, oh, that's so awesome. But at the last song of the movie is Whole Lotta Love. And when they get to the breakdown and Robert Plant does the woman,
Right.
You need love. And he does that scream. And man, the first, I got the hair all stood up on my arms when he hits that scream and they kick back in and the drums come in and it still gives, see, right awesome. There. It still happens today, that thing. And I was like, oh yeah, that's it. And I still get goosebumps and I still get chills. Sure. I see it now almost 40 years later and it still gives me chills. There's something magical about that just hits me right in my soul of my being where I'm just like, oh my God. Look at that.
Well, and hopefully for those of you that are listening to this, we get so caught up in this instrumentation thing, like being a guitar player or being a bass player or whatever it might be. I've been teaching for many years. I don't teach one-on-one anymore, but I taught guitar lessons for many, many, many years. It's so funny how toward the end of my career of teaching private lessons, students were less and less connected to music. They were there because their parents wanted them to play, or they'd come in with a guitar because they wanted to learn how to play guitar. And then you'd say, okay, what kind of music do you listen to? And they would tell you what it was, and nothing that they were listening to had guitar in it. We're talking about Jay-Z and we're holding a guitar. And no disrespect at all, because everybody should listen to whatever they want to listen to. But the most important thing I hope you're hearing is that there's a connection to the music. There's a connection to the artist or the band. And these are the things for players like us at our age. That's why you played. I played guitar because I needed to play the music that I loved. For whatever reason, AC/DC hits home for me. It's right where Angus Young, I don't try and replicate his style or anything like that, but AC/DC is absolutely the perfect rock and roll band for me. So when I hear it, I want to turn it up. And that's the way I felt as a kid. And that's why I picked up the guitar, was to play, like Brian's talking about, play this music that I loved so much. And the scales and things came afterwards. And my point to this is that you need to find a passion for the music, not just how much theory can I learn, or how many scales can I play, or how fast can I play. That's all great stuff. But so often I find people that are just lost in their musical journey. They're not connecting to music anymore. They're just doing all of these fundamental elements. So that's why I think those remote collaborations, bringing it back around, are so fun, because we try and find songs, not just songs that are popular so we get a bunch of views or on the radio. We try and find songs that are fun for us to play together that maybe we normally wouldn't play.
Well, there's probably a good 25 or 30+% of them that are songs that were never big hits. There's several that we have done that are very, what you would call a deep track or an album track that like weren't a single, were never a big hit, but we just have that connection to the song and go, oh, that would be really fun to do. God, yes. I've always loved that song. I've always loved that song too. Let's do it. Yes. Okay, great.
Yeah, I think that's really important, is just keep motivated, and music should be that motivation that drives you to want to practice or do whatever it might be. So if we keep going here, you've got Led Zeppelin, you've got Kiss. So when do you finally decide that you're going to start playing, and was bass the instrument that you grabbed first?
It wasn't. So I had taken piano lessons and that, but my first band, 7th grade, I think I was 13, I was the singer. So we got junior high school, and there were a bunch of kids from another elementary school, and they kind of had a band, but they didn't have a singer. And so I was like, hey, I could do that. And so I became the singer.
Sure.
And we had this band, and we played a couple of parties. And my second or third band, where I was still singing, where we were 4-piece. So there were songs where I was like, well, we could use another guitar player. I didn't do that. So I started playing rhythm guitar. And then we had a thing where I played bass on a song because our bass player in that band was going to play piano on it. So it was like, well, okay, well, cool. And so that was actually the first time I ever played a bass.
I hope you're enjoying this episode so far and you're getting motivated to take your guitar playing to the next level. Please do me a favor and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. It'll help the show grow and reach more rock stars like you who want to improve their guitar playing. Also, I'd love to know what parts of the episode you liked, as well as what you learned. So please share this podcast and tag us at GuitarZoom.com on your social post. And now, let's get back to the podcast.
There was always something I dug about bass, but I never really knew it. And there was stuff about songs, like some of my favorite songs and favorite parts of songs were always the bass line, where there was just always something cool, something, whether it was just a groove or some cool lick that I would bring up to friends and they'd go, what? I didn't even hear that in the song, because it's
Yep.
way down in the mix, but
Sure.
I'm going, oh, no, but right there, that's super cool. And they're like, okay, fine, whatever. And so I began playing instruments, and I played some keyboards in those bands as well. So it just kind of happened more out of necessity of, hey, here's our band, but we want to do that song. It has an extra acoustic or keyboards or this or that. And being the singer was usually like, well, you're not doing anything with your hands, so okay, I'll do that too. And so it just happened. And then I just started playing bass in a band. Was our bass player quit, and like McCartney. So I went out and I bought a bass and an amp, and off we went. And it was just one of those things. It was a very natural transition, again, because I love so many bass lines of Gene, and I love so many things about what John Paul Jones did, and was always drawn to those songs. The Lemon Song, I could sit and sing you that bass line when I was 12 because I just loved how John Paul Jones walked. The line was just all over and throughout the whole song. I mean, it's a very active song, but it's so cool. And I always loved that. It was a pretty easy transition for me to go from one to the other. And then here I am. So, I mean, it was an evolution, and often out of necessity. I kind of figure things happened how they were supposed to go.
It's interesting because you're talking about me when you mentioned about not hearing the bass. When I was younger, I had a great ability of being able to dial in that guitar and then figure it out by ear, which I'm thankful for. But in the process, I didn't listen to a lot of other things. And it's amazing as I got older and started going back and being able to listen to the music more holistically and hear more of what was going on in there. And Kiss is so funny because Gene, those bass parts were far more interesting than I think anybody ever gave him.
Huge McCartney fan, and especially on like those first 3 records. You could tell he was trying to do his best Paul McCartney over those songs. I mean, you listen to songs like Nothing to Lose or Let Me Know, and it's like, if you take the whole visual of Kiss out of it, if you just sit and listen to that song and you just hear it, it's like he's really trying to be Paul McCartney. You can tell how much he loved Beatles, and you hear, I mean, I've heard him in countless, interviews. I saw them on Ed Sullivan, and I was like, that's what I want to do. And you can hear that in his playing, totally. And no, I don't think he gets nearly the credit. And I love his playing. I really do. Especially the early playing is really tasteful. Now, again, in the 80s, when he got distracted and was trying to be a producer and a movie star, no, his playing really simplified. And you can tell his level of engagement in the band and in the music at the time. But man, those early records, even on like Love Gun, he has done some really great playing on those records that he does not nearly get the accolades that he should, because it's really nice stuff.
And again, for those of you listening, think about that from a musical perspective. I'm not trying to summarize or simplify, but I always think of like Black Sabbath thing where you have a guitar line and a bass line that are following each other. And not that it always does that, because it doesn't. Just making analogy here. But it's funny when you start hearing how harmonically, how much the bass can add it might follow and make something more energetic or powerful by doing the same thing. But if you start listening to bass players and how they start moving differently than a guitar player does, and that really winds up making the song stand out and become more interesting. And see, I don't think like that. I'm not a bass player and I don't have a bass player brain, even though I wish I did. So when I'm noodling with stuff and then I try and come up with a bass line, the bass lines are always more Sabbath style bass lines because I don't really know what I'm doing. Someday it'll be interesting to try and get together and actually do some writing with different things. My whole thing is I know what I know and I don't know what I don't know. And so the Pareto rule, the 80-20 rule, I'd rather stay with what I'm good at and then give that to somebody else and have them do what they're going to do, as opposed to me trying to pretend like I can do something that I can't. That's where the good stuff really comes from, is trying to give everybody their chance to do what they do best and then bring it all together. Which is interesting too when you think of bands, and I keep picking on Kiss, but if Kiss came to Fargo and they played at the Fargo Dome, and I remember a few years ago, many, many years ago, Paul Stanley came to Fargo and played at the Fargo Theater. And so it's interesting how when you get a band together, that band could play a stadium, and then you separate those parts from each other. And now Paul's not playing Fargo Dome, or Gene's not coming here playing the Fargo Dome. It needs to be Kiss to be able to be the Fargo Dome. And that's the power of a band.
Absolutely.
Because now we're getting a little bit closer to the bands. What year was this when you started playing in bands, like with Lance? When does all this stuff start happening?
I started playing clubs when I was 16. I got into a band where everybody was 22, 23 years old. I actually joined when I was 15. Somehow I got the gig. So we started playing bars when I was 16. So I spent the last couple years of high school, again, unlike today, clubs back then had music 7 days a week. Generally, the really good bands got to play on the weekends. Well, that was not us. So we generally played Sunday through Wednesday. Usually 2 or 3 of those 4 or 5 days of the week where we could play in a bar, we would play. And I would get up Monday, Tuesday morning after playing the club all night and getting home 2, 3 in the morning and get up, go to school, and my hair was still half ratted up because, that's what we did back then. And I began playing clubs, and that was 88, 89. So it's been 34 years of doing that. And so I started playing, you mentioned Lance King. So that was really the first A-list band that I got in. And that was actually right when I started playing bass. I actually first auditioned for that band as a rhythm guitar player. They're like, we're going to stick 4-piece. Well, do you have a bass player yet? Nope. I'm going to audition for bass player. Okay. And they're like, all right, here's the songs. And I was actually given, I think, 3 or 4 original songs because it was actually an original band. And I had to write bass lines to them and then show up and play for them. And that was actually really an interesting way to really kick off my full-time bass playing career. Again, right around the time of the band where I said our bass player quit. So I had auditioned as the rhythm guitar player 4 or 5 months earlier. Wasn't going to happen. So I was still in my other band. A month or 2 later, our bass player quits. And everyone looked at me and said, okay, well, you should play bass. Okay, I'll play bass. So I start playing bass 3 months later. Then I'm talking to Lance and he's like, yeah, we don't have a bass player yet. I want my shot at it. It's like, okay. And they had auditioned a ton of people. And I came in and played my bass lines. And it probably helped that I could sing, back him up, and do whatever harmony he asked me to do and whatever thing along with him, which became a good part of the sound of that band. And so I got the gig, and then I just woodshedded just playing bass, and off we went. So that was, I think, 92. My first actual gig playing bass guitar, we warmed up for David Lee Roth. That was our first show in the band, and that was the first show I played bass. So that was interesting. First show on an instrument. And then off we went. Okay,
so for those of you that don't know who we're talking about, his name is Lance King. So Lance is a singer, amazing singer from the Twin Cities, the Minneapolis area. And I have another podcast where I actually talked to Lance. And I and Brian were in a band together called Avian. And so that's where I connected with Brian for the first time. I had known Lance before that simply because I had Grimstein. I had an album, Grimstein, with Steve Grimmett from Grim Reaper. And Lance was distributing that album. So that's where, on Nightmare Records, it was called. I don't know if Nightmare is still around or not. I don't think so. But so Lance was a distributor of that record. And so that's where I got to know Lance. And then I had heard about this opportunity to play with Avian they were losing their guitar player. So I was terrified to go down there and try out because I was like, well, it's Minneapolis. I learned the tunes and went down there and played with these guys and got the gig, and it all went fine. And that's where everything started. So that's where I met Brian. And then Brian and I have just been doing all kinds of things since then, different kinds of projects. As busy as we are, we try things and it doesn't always work out.
But we keep trying.
That's right. So that's cool. So tell me a little bit, let's move past that now. Let's just talk about you for a second. When you think about your main influences, we know there's Led Zeppelin, we know there's Kiss. When you think of musical influences that got you playing, what are some other bands that you love?
I was very fortunate to grow up in a house with a lot of music. Both of my parents were really into music and listened to a lot of music. And so we had a lot of Beatles in the house, a lot of Three Dog Night, a lot of surf music. My dad loved Beach Boys. My mother always listened to music in the car. There's always a lot of music around the house. A lot of 70s soft rock was always on. And so that's a lot of the music that I grew up with. So just all of the music of the 70s was everywhere, and it was all kinds.
That's interesting because you are an amazing singer as much as you are a bass player. And I think a lot of that has to do with it, like listening to a lot of music that has a lot of harmony. When I was growing up, I listened to a lot of Ted Nugent and Rush and AC/DC and all these kinds of things where there really wasn't a lot of harmony. And if there was, it was like maybe a single line or something. But my parents didn't listen to a lot of, we did listen to some Beatles, but we didn't listen to a lot of 70s stuff. We didn't listen to a lot of Beach Boys and that sort of thing that had those big harmonies. And so when I started playing, singing wasn't something that I even thought of. It was just guitar, guitar, guitar. That's all anything was when I was a kid.
The stuff that filled the space before and after the guitar solo.
Is there such a thing? I didn't realize. So listening to that kind of stuff, I can totally see that in your influence in the way you play and certainly the way you sing and your ability of being able to just grab harmonies and do what you do. So now let's talk specifically about bass players. So we've got Gene, we've got John Paul Jones. Who else is in there?
It's funny because I did a big long during lockdown, these like top 10 albums that influenced me, top 10 this that influenced me. And I did do one on bass players and guys like John Deacon from Queen, very musical, very tasteful, just filling in the song, just always playing the right notes for the song. Very huge fan of his. And then there are even the influences that are indirect, like yours with Angus Young. Because I think if anybody watched you play, listened, I don't think they would ever go, you know who I bet Steve is really influenced by? That's not a guy who you would say. And my version of that would probably be Steve Harris, Maiden. And it's interesting because I do a fair amount of playing with chords and extra notes and not playing the root. And it's interesting. And I get that from Steve Harris. He does it in a different way than I do. But I just always remember listening to those Iron Maiden records and just going, in some instances early on, I couldn't do what he was doing at the proficiency level. So that was my version of it. And then that just became part of my playing, was just my version of the Steve Harris line with chords. Those are probably the big ones. Then we get into the later people I respect and influence a little bit, but guys who I modeled my playing or my role in the band, somebody like a Pat Badger in Extreme or a Doug in King's X, where it's like, yeah, I want to play, I want to sing, I'm going to do all of these roles in the band. And those are the guys who I don't know that they really as much influence the notes I play as a player, but certainly influence how I approach being a part of a project. Here's all the roles I want to do in a band, like that guy.
So for you, this is kind of a geek question, but not the songs that you play, but you personally, do you prefer to play with a pick or do you play with your fingers? Or does it depend?
It totally depends on the song.
So like if you and I were writing a song, would you try it with your fingers and go, no, I think it needs a pick, or vice versa?
It kind of hits me right away, the style of the song. And again, it's the feel. And it isn't always even like, well, if I have to play a lot of notes or if it's faster, I need to use a pick because I'm faster with that than my fingers or vice versa. It's really a feel thing where it's just the feeling of the line, like how driving, how hard does it need to be? It totally depends on the song. And there's songs that I do each way. And there's songs that would be awkward to try it the other direction.
Well, here's an equally interesting question. When you learn songs by artists, do you try to replicate the way that they're playing it, or is it irrelevant in your mind? I shouldn't say irrelevant, but that's not going to dictate how you're going to play it. You're going to play it the way that it feels best to you, regardless
I'm
of
going
whether.
to play it the way that it feels best for me. I, a long time ago, stopped trying to be a jukebox, and it really started with my voice. Very few times in my whole life has anybody ever said, you know, you sound just like that thing. I'm not really a jukebox. And I feel like, okay, I can do that well. Really early on, especially, I didn't sound and couldn't imitate anybody and this and that. And early on, it was a knock a lot of the times where like, you don't sound like Ozzy. And I was trying desperately to sound like Ozzy because I was 14 and my friend thought that was cool. So I really wanted to do Paranoid really good.
Right.
But I didn't. And I think at some point, if you play long enough and you just get to the point where you're like, I'm really not trying to be that person. I'm me, and I'm going to put my stamp on it, and I'm going to do it more my way.
I'm so glad you said that, because I deal with this on a regular basis with people that watch YouTube videos, and that's how they're learning how to play. And then they're like, well, you know, this was played here. And again, I think in the real world, it's not just our age. I think it's just in the real world when you play, you start trying to develop you and what's going to work best for the output of whatever it is you're doing by the way you're going to do it. And that dictates more than whether I'm using single coils or whether I'm using this guitar, or you're totally right, or these pickups or whatever it might be. When I was playing a lot in different bands, I didn't have different guitars for different sounds. I just had maybe a different tuning or something. It was just the guitar, and the way you rolled your volume and the way you picked those strings would fit the song however, but at the end of the day, it was your guitar tone and your fingers and your playing. So when I think about like guitar solos and things like that, very seldom does it ever occur to me to do the solo the way the solo was supposed to be, you know, unless it's something pretty religious. For me, something like Crazy Train, I have to get it fairly close because in my mind, it's pretty sacred. And so it kind of has to be as close as I can, but it's still never going to be, no matter how hard you try, you're still going to be you. You're never going to be this person, whoever it is.
Yeah, you wouldn't change it, the lick and Layla. I don't know if you'd call it a sign of maturity in your playing. And I don't know when it changed, but I remember when I used to be like, I got to try to do it like that. And I got to try to do it because everybody wants it and and it's 1987 and we got to try to be exactly like this. And now that just seems like, so I'm going to play it. I'm here. So if you want me to do it, I'm going to do it the way that I do these things. It's one of those things that just changes over time where you're just like, no, like you said, it would never occur to me to go, well, I've got to try to change my guitar or change this or that or change to try to fit that song. Like, well, no, I'm playing that song. I'm Steve. Steve's playing the song. So you're going to get the Steve version of this song.
That's right. So another geek question, what gear are you using right now?
I run a pretty basic setup. I always laugh when bands open for us or if somebody comes backstage and they go, let me see your rig, because they expect mission control, you know, like I'm going to have this big room at NASA, you know, with 9,000 things. And it's like, that's your rig? Yep, that's all it is. So I actually switched to Spectre basses about a year and a half ago. And so I'm playing all those now on the road, which has been great. Are beautiful instruments. They have a very distinct sound. It's a beautiful rock and roll growl to them. And those go into a compressor and into a Sans amp. Right here, just your basic Sans amp RB1, the same as the little pedal that we've all seen 1,000 times.
Right.
And that's what I record with too. Simple, straight in, that's it.
There's two things. Number one, the technology has gotten so much better. And it doesn't mean that there aren't old amps and things like that that sound amazing, because absolutely that's true. But the second thing is, the older you get, the less you want to haul around a bunch of crap, and you don't want things going wrong all the time. I'm not saying this is the same for everybody. I completely feel the same way, though. It's like, all I need is an amp. I still very much prefer a tube amp for live stuff, and maybe a delay or a reverb pedal or a pedal that has both of them built in. And I'm kind of good. I don't need a bunch of other stuff. And it just makes the whole thing easier.
Well, and I was always like that. I mean, even through all the years of the 90s and everything leading up, even pre-Hairball, where still have it. It's in my rack on the road as my backup. I have an old Gallien Kruger 800 RB amp that I bought when I actually got the gig in the King's Machine. The same amp I've had. I played it through all my bands in the 90s. And after that, same amp, one amp. And again, straight in, nothing else, just chord, amp, and go. It's just been a creature of habit and a creature of just keep it simple, because I just want a good tone and then I'm done. And that's it. And I don't want to have to deal with it every night. I've played with guys who every night are sitting there tweaking and tweaking and tweaking because, the tubes are getting older or this or that. And I'm just like, I'm ready.
And that's the thing is when you play gigs, like if you're not the headliner, if you're playing along with 3 other bands like we used to do in Avian, you have 5-minute sound check. If you're lucky, you might have a 30-second sound check. You got to go. And the other thing too that I think about too, Brian, is I don't know if it was the same way for you, but when I was younger, I never had any money. I mean, I was broke all the time being a musician and whatever jobs in life. I just never had any money. So it's not like I had 30 guitars and 20 amps. You had 3 guitars and an amp, and there's what you have. And so regardless of what band you're playing with, it's the same stuff.
Absolutely. There is the necessity of it as well. I've only got this much money, so I'm just going to buy this one pretty good amp, and then I'm going to be pretty good. But also, I just never wanted to deal with, I have a buzz. Well, Brian, you've got 27 pedals hooked up, so start playing with patch cables. No, I'm good. I don't want any part of that.
I totally get it. All right, so we're going to just wrap this up in a little bit because I don't want to keep Brian forever, but what are some artists that you're listening to that are current? Is there any stuff out there that you're listening to of newer bands, newer music?
I kind of dig like the Rival Sons and Dirty Honey, Greta Van Fleet have been doing. It's a little retro, it's a little throwback, and Blackberry Smoke. Those are kind of the bands I dig who are doing new stuff lately. I have an appreciation, and again, I think that's, well, I also love Wolfie's record. I was very anxious to hear it when it came out, and I have followed him on social media, and it was like a year earlier, he had some teaser lips of the songs, and I was like, ugh. So that was great to finally hear. So, I mean, those are the ones who I'm...
That's cool. Okay, so last question. If you were not a musician, what would you be doing right now?
Probably more design work, visual design, creative design, digital software, art, graphics. That would probably be what I would be doing more of. And I still do some, and I would just probably be doing a lot more of that just because I enjoy the creative process. I love art. I appreciate art, and it doesn't matter necessarily what the medium is.
That's cool. Well, thank you, buddy. I appreciate all the time that you've spent with me today. This is great.
I appreciate it as well. As you know, Steve, you are one of my favorite people on the planet Earth, in or out of music, and this was fun.
Well, that's awesome. All right, so make sure that if you want to check out Brian, obviously you can go to hairballonline.com. On social media, you've got Brian Hollenbeck. I know it's HBK. I'm not sure if they can find you by typing in Brian Hollenbeck or if they need to type in Brian HBK.
You have to type in Brian HBK.
Okay, so you can find him on social media under Brian HBK, and of course, you can always look for any of the remote collaborations that I've done, and you can find his name and stuff that he's done there too. So again, thank you so much, my friend, for taking some time out to hang out with me.
Anytime. I will always hang out with you, Steve.
All right, brother.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, take care, and I'll talk to you soon, okay?
See ya. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed today's podcast and want to learn guitar even faster, go to GuitarZoom.com and click the Get Started button to get access to courses that are right for your interest and skill level. Again, go to GuitarZoom.com and click the Get Started button.